Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janvalabha Giri Bardari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Banachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramhamsa Parvadikacharya Atto Tadasata Shri Shri Mad His Divine Grace A Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Bhai Swami Prabhupada Ki all glories, all glories to Swami
Hare Krishna.
So we're on 3.5.20 today, right? Or have we slipped in this progression of verses again? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaka Damayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Pada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 20. Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Prajasam Yamano Yamaha Prajasam Yamano Yamaha Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutat Jata Satyavati Sutat Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Prajasam Yamano Yamaha Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutat
Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan
Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan
Prajasamyayam Mano Yamaha
Prajasamyamano Yamaha
Dhatu Kshetre Bhujishyayam
Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam
Satyavati Sutta
Jata Satyavati Sutat Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Prajasamyamano Yamaha Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutat Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Prajasamyamano Yamaha Bhratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutat. Ladies. Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Prajasham Yamano Yamaha Bratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutta Mandavya Great Rishi Mandavya Muni Shapat by his curse Bhagavan the greatly powerful Praja one who is born Samyamanaha controller of death Yamaha known as Yamaraj Bhratuhu of the brother Kshetre in the wife Bhujishyayam kept Jataha born Satyavati the mother of Vichitravirya and Vyasadeva Sutat by the son Vyasadeva. So the translation reads, I know that you are now Vidura due to the cursing of Mandavya Muni, and that formerly you were King Yamaraj, the great controller of living entities, after their death. You were begotten by the son of Satyavati, Vyasadeva, in the kept wife of his brother. So I say, and you please repeat, I know that you are now Vidura due to the cursing of Mandavya Muni, and that formerly you were King Yamaraj, the great controller of living entities, after their death. You were begotten by the son of Satyavati, Vyasadeva, in the kept wife of his brother. Okay, so here we have the purport by Srila Prabhupada. It's not very long. Mandavya Muni was the great sage, see Bhagavat, Srimad Bhagavatam 1.13.1. And Vidura was formerly the controller Yamaraj, who takes charge of the living entities after death. Birth, maintenance, and death are three conditional states of the living entities who are within the material world. As the appointed controller after death, Yamaraj once tried Mandavya Muni for his childhood profligacy, and ordered him to be pierced with a lance. Mandavya, being angry at punishment, cursed him to become a Shudra, member of the less intelligent laborer class. Thus Yamaraj took birth in the womb of the kept wife of Vichitravirya from the semen of Vichitravirya's brother Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva is the son of Satyavati by the great king Shantanu. The father of Bhishmadev. Oh, I'm sorry. I blurred two words together and it made it not make sense. Thus Yamaraj took birth from the womb of the kept wife of Vichitravirya from the semen of Vichitravirya's brother Vyasadeva. Okay, ends of the statement. Vyasadeva is the son of Satyavati by the great king Shantanu, the father of Bhishmadev. That's what it says here, but that's not right. Vyasadeva.
In the old version of Bhagavatam, because on Veda base it is updated and they changed it.
What's that?
On Veda base we have a different purport. There must have been a mistake in that version.
Yeah.
Because Vyasadeva is not the son of Shantanu.
No, yeah, I was just wondering, that was what was...
Here,
I didn't pick it up. It says that Vyasadeva, the son of Satyavati by the great King Shantanu and the father of Bhishmadev. Well, King Shantanu is indeed the father of Bhishmadev, but Vyasadeva is the son of Satyavati by, what's his name? Parashara Muni, right.
This translation is updated on the screen.
Is it? Does it say something different from what I was reading?
Yes.
It says Vyasadeva is the son of Satyavati, but the great says Parashara.
Yeah, that's completely absent from the translation that I'm looking at here. Oh, another one that's, this is the Veda base, and this is the pocket Vedas here that I'm reading here. When the pocket Vedas, they have a lot of interesting things about love of cod. And then I just saw cod consciousness, so there's lots of mistakes in there. So at any rate, it's different from the Veda base. All right, so this mysterious history of Vidura was known to Maitreya Muni because he happened to be a contemporary friend of Vyasadev's. In spite of Vidura's birth from the womb of a kept wife, because he had otherwise high parentage and great connection, he inherited the highest talent of becoming a great devotee of the Lord. To take birth in such a great family is understood to be an advantage for attaining devotional life. Vidura was given this chance due to his previous greatness. Mandavya Shapad Bhagavan Pradyasam Yamano Yamaha Bratu Kshetre Bhujishyayam Jata Satyavati Sutat. I know that you are now Vidura due to the cursing of Mandavya Muni, and that formerly you were King Yamaraj, the great controller of the living entities, after their death. You were begotten by the son of Satyavati, Vyasadeva, and the kept wife of his brother. So, I'll just clear up a little bit of the history and lineage here because the situation, of course, was that we know that there were two children from Satyavati that were supposed to be kings. One of them was Vichitravirya, and the other one was what's his name? What is it? Chitrangada. Yeah, Chitrangada. So Chitrangada and Vichitravirya. Chitrangada died early. He was supposed to take the throne. He died early because a Gandharva had the same name, and they thought the Gandharva took issue with him, and Chitrangada was slain. Vichitravirya was a young boy, and he was to be given 3 wives that were achieved for him by Bhishmadev. So Bhishmadev went and claimed the 3 princesses of Kashi, Amba, Ambalika, and Ambika. So he brought them back to be wives of Vichitravirya. However, Vichitravirya didn't live very long because evidently he contracted tuberculosis and died at a very early age. So there was no one to become king because Vichitravirya didn't have any sons, and Chitrangada was gone, and so there was no one. But Satyavati had a child before she had these other 2, and that child was Vyasadeva, and that's a whole story in itself. I'm not going to get into it because there's so many stories and sidelines here, but we'll just leave that for another day. So Vyasadeva, of course, is the author of Vedic literature. He's the one that writes all the Vedic literature. And so because he was also a descendant of Satyavati, he was eligible to prolong the line of the kings. So he was called to impregnate the wives that were to give children to Vichachaviri, who is now deceased. So Amba, of course, left early. She had actually wanted to become married to Shalva. That's a whole story in itself. So you have Ambika and Ambalika. So Ambika and Ambalika, they each come together with Vyasadeva. And because the situation is very difficult, there's no one to be king, and they want a child as soon as possible. Vyasadeva asks that the girls be put through a system of purification first. But everyone says there's no time for that. We just have to have children as soon as possible. So he meets one of the queens or princesses of Kashi. And when she sees Vyasadeva, she's told that there's another member of the family that will give a child to her. So she's expecting a prince like her deceased husband, Vichachaviri. But instead, it's Vyasadeva, who's a yogi, and he's got matted locks. He looks very freakish and very strange. And when she sees him, she is terrified, and she closes her eyes. So, of course, they come together, and when Satyavati asks Vyasadeva what the nature of the child will be, then Vyasadeva replies, well, because she closed her eyes, the child will be blind. And indeed, the child was born blind. That became, of course, Dhritarashtra. Then the idea was, well, that's no good, because you can't have a blind king. A king that has no vision is not able to protect anyone. So Vyasadeva comes together with the third queen. So the first one left. The second one was became the mother of Dhritarashtra, and the third queen became the mother of Pandu. When she saw Vyasadeva, she was also terrified, but she turned white. So as a result, Pandu was born very whitish in complexion. Then they thought that they should have yet one more son. So neither of the two queens could go bear the idea of coming together with Vyasadeva again. So they substituted one of their maidservants. And because they substituted one of the maidservants, Vyasadeva came together with the maidservant. But the maidservant was not terrified by Vyasadeva, and she treated him very respectfully. So Vyasadeva explained that from her womb would be born Vidura, who would be very noble and actually be the spiritual guide for the entire family. So although he was not born from one of the legitimate queens, he was born from one of their servants, he was considered royalty in the sense that he was part of the family, but not in the sense that he had a claim to the throne. So Vidura then was the person who we see is very important. He leaves Hastinapur when he's insulted by Duryodhan. He travels on pilgrimage, and then he shows up again. And here we're talking about how he had hoped to get instruction from Uddhava, but Uddhava referred him instead to Maitreya, so now he's getting to hear from Maitreya. Now, how was it that Yamaraj became born as Vidura? Vidura was considered a Sudra, which is a low class, even though he was in a royal line, because his mother was not royalty. So he was considered a Sudra. But nobody actually related to him that way, because by qualifications he was nothing like a Sudra. He was actually fit to be the spiritual master of the entire group. And he often tried to give good instruction to Dhritarashtra, who was his elder but blind brother. So he tried to help Dhritarashtra, which failed. Dhritarashtra didn't listen to him, and as a result, the Battle of Kurukshetra was fought. But Vidura was cursed. There was a story, and it's told a few different ways, that Mandavya Muni, if you go back to first canto, 13th chapter, he's called Manduka Muni, so two are the same evidently, Manduka and Mandavya. Manduka means frog, so I don't know how that figures in there, but somehow or other. Mandavya Muni or Mandavya Rishi was a great yogi, and he had taken a vow of silence for a period of time, and he was standing in a very difficult posture. And he had a little hermitage, and while he was at his hermitage, the thieves or dacoits were in the area, and they had stolen some things from the king. And they came and they hid the stuff that they had stolen in his hermitage. And then they heard that the king's men were coming to arrest them. So they ditched out, they ran away. The king's men caught them anyway, and they caught Mandavya Muni because they thought he was a part of the whole thing. They thought he was involved in the theft in some way. So they brought him, and he was sentenced, like they, to die on a pike. Prabhupada describes it in a really gruesome way in, I think, Bhagavatam somewhere, or maybe in one of his classes, where he said there used to be a punishment where they would take a pike and they would impale somebody in their anus, and the weight of the body would just gradually pull the pike through their entire body, and they would die that way. And this was evidently the punishment that was awarded to Mandavya Muni, even though he didn't say anything because he had taken a vow of silence. So he didn't defend himself that he was not involved with these thieves. So they all died right away, but because he was a great Muni, he didn't die. And the king came to hear that there was one of the dacoits had not died, and then he learned that it was Mandavya Muni. He said, well, that's a great Muni. He couldn't have been involved. And the king came there, and he found Mandavya Muni, and he begged forgiveness and tried to pull the pike out of Mandavya Muni, but it broke off inside. I know, it was a gruesome story. But at any rate, he was called Ani Mandavya after that, because he had part of a lance in his body. And so he traveled around, and he continued to some time, but after some time he became curious why this had happened to him. Because while he was impaled, a lot of things happened. One of them was that great sages, they took the form of birds, and they came there where he was, and they asked him, Mandavya, what have you done to earn this punishment? And he said, I don't know, but I'm sure that I am suffering now because of something I've done, some horrible thing I've done in my past, so don't worry about it. But after a while, he became curious to find out what it was that he did that earned him this, gruesome torture. So he came before Yamaraj. He traveled to where Yamaraj, and of course we know Yamaraj is the person who awards punishment to sinful people after death. So when Mandavya Muni came before Yamaraj, he said, my dear Yamaraj, I would like to know why exactly I was punished in this severe way. So please tell me what I did that earned this punishment. And Yamaraj explained that as a child, he had impaled an ant with a thorn. And Mandavya Muni couldn't believe it. He said, what? He said, Yamaraj, you're supposed to know what's right and what's wrong. You're supposed to know what punishments are fitting and ones are not. I've done so many austerities through my life, and I performed this when I was a child. And before the age of 12, children are not responsible for what they do. They're not adults. They don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing. You have punished me cruelly and unnecessarily. Therefore, I curse you that you will become a Shudra and live on the earth. So this is how Yamaraj came. And interesting, a couple of days ago in Kavi Chandra's class, we find that this was kind of a chance for Yamaraj to get a furlough from his duty all day long. I don't know if he works 7 days a week or what it is, but all day long. He is meeting sinful people and deciding what kind of punishment they get in the hellish planets, So he's meeting people and meting out various kinds of punishments. So he knew that Krishna was appearing on earth, and he wanted to, participate, but he didn't have a role. So this whole episode happened just so that he could get a break from being Yamaraj and judging people. He could come to earth and spend time. I guess he spent, something like 100, 120 years or something thereabouts on the earth, because he was older than Krishna. And so demigod time, since they live 1 day for one of our years, that meant that he probably spent about 120 days or 130 days, about 3 months. So he got a good furlough, from his demigod position in the heavenly planets. And he spent, about 125 or a little bit more years here in the earth. And during that time, he was Vidura. And he got the chance to meet Krishna. He got the chance to get enlightenment. A little bit by Uddhava, and then more here by Maitreya. So I think probably one of the things that's interesting is how this can happen. That how it is that the wheels of justice can slide off the track. How is it that Vidura meted out this punishment to, how it was that Yamaraj meted out this punishment to Mandavya. Well, oftentimes these things happen as we see. There is a sub-theme, and that was that Yamaraj wanted to participate in the pastimes of Krishna, so it gave him an opportunity to do this. As far as Mandavya goes, there is no improper punishment in the whole overall grand scheme of things. Everything, according to karma, is destined. Of course, if we take to devotional service, our karma can be erased or removed. In fact, that's the whole thing that Krishna is saying when he says, sarva dharma parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja ham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayashyami ma shuchaha. Do not worry, Arjuna, that all dharmas are taken care of and all your karma will be dealt with. Do not fear, ma suchaha. So abandon all kinds of dharmas and surrender unto me. And this is in general the way that it works. Krishna does not absolutely remove all of our karma, but he removes the biggest portion of it, so that what we experience as devotees is a sort of pale representation of what would probably have happened to us if we had never taken to devotional service. Because by taking the process of devotional service, we become purified, we give up our sinful desires, we give up our sinful habits. That's possible when we take to devotional service. And therefore, all the downstream karma that was on the conveyor belt heading our way is revoked to a certain extent. It's revoked. But of course, the material world cuts nobody a break. It doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter whether you're noble or savage, it doesn't matter whether you're good or bad, it doesn't matter whether you're old or young, it doesn't matter whether you're royalty or you have no status. Everybody gets clubbed by the material energy. It's an equal opportunity offender, so everybody is raked over. That's the nice thing about the material world. So the real business is to learn how to get out of here. So the thing that modern society does not realize is that the material world is not what people think it is. People think it's kind of a playground where we can enjoy various things. And certainly, yes, you can enjoy things to some extent. But really, the material world is a giant machine that watches your every move and then is planning your good and bad karma to get funneled back into your future life at some point. And how does this work? It works through the demigods. There are 33 million of them, and chief of the ones in charge of karma is Yamaraj. So he's the one who actually is the final judge and arbiter of what happens to a particular individual. And so Yamaraj, he's the one that judges people and then decides, especially sinful people. He's not involved in the change of body for those who are not sinful. He's not a part of the system for them. They take birth again if they're not ready to go back to the spiritual world according to Krishna's various energies, but they don't have to see Yamaraj. However, those who are extremely sinful, they do have to appear before Yamaraj, just like our earthly courts. It works exactly the same way. In fact, our whole earthly legal system is a kind of weak representation of the whole karmic court and trial system, which happens in Yamalok, which is a friendly, happy place just a few miles away from hell, where people, once they get judged and everything, they get dispatched by the bailiff, and they get a chance to experience whatever torture is their lot according to the tortures they cause to others. So, of course, in the hellish worlds, people suffer in a subtle body, so they are not disturbed or destroyed by the suffering they encounter. Rather, they're able to experience suffering again and again. And then eventually, they get released, and they are able to continue the cycle of reincarnation. And so this whole system is there so that people will at least try to learn how to be pious. But even that is a trap, as we've said, because what we really want to do is not accumulate pious credits, but we want to get rid of both sinful and pious credits. We want to get rid of papa and punya, and we want to take to devotional service, which eats up both. Devotional service eats up the past sin and retribution that was headed our way. It also eats up the past good karma that we had heading our way, so we aren't trapped by our good karma either. So this is how the universe really works. And of course, that's not the subject of this part of Bhagavatam. Here we're going to learn very much like, it's odd that in Canto 2, Chapter 5, we hear how the material world is arranged and how it is deployed. And here in Canto 3, Chapter 5, we hear again how the material world is deployed. And the two accounts are very similar. There's some difference and some difference in focus. In 2.5, we're hearing Narada Muni speaking to his father, Brahma. But here we're hearing Maitreya speaking to Vidura. So in both cases, we're hearing about how the material elements, we're going to hear how the material elements come into existence. Because this is a virtual world. Everything looks solid. Everything seems really tangible. We have a naive sense of what's going on here. But all those things are fiction. It just looks a certain way. And yes, the world does seem solid to a certain extent, but as we see with the amazing potencies of even people like Mandavya Muni, They can counteract what appear to be the laws of physics. They can counteract what should have been a death sentence for them. And we see that in the same token, that something is going on that's completely invisible in our everyday world, and that is the progress of karma as it funnels its way back to the individual. So good karma and bad karma, they boomerang up into the sky, and they hover for some time, and then they come back. And we can ask, well, why is there a time delay between we create a sin and the karma hits us? Well, sometimes there's not a time delay, but most of the time there is. And the reason that there's a time delay is that most people can't put the two together. They can't realize that they, because of a particular sin, are now suffering. So this allows people or encourages them to stay here in this crazy world. And otherwise, if it was too obvious, then people would immediately just leave the material world and go back to the spiritual world. But there has to be a reason to stay here. Krishna has to create a place as an alternative for the spiritual world. So he creates a place where, unless you're really serious, you will not understand what's going on here, and you'll take this material world for a solid place, which is tangible, where you can try to enjoy yourself, but you'll never really be able to enjoy yourself. And your karma will hit you in the back, and you won't know why you're suffering. So that's actually what is happening to most people, except those who read Srimad Bhagavatam and learn from a bona fide spiritual master what's actually going on here. Okay, so let me take some questions now, right? You have to speak a little louder. My hearing's terrible.
Like a devotee who just joined and he's following the process, doing some devotional service, but he's a Prakrita Bhakta and he's still attached to the material world, commits sins and so forth. So does it mean that he won't get entangled in karma and next life he won't meet Yamaraj?
Yes, generally that seems to be the way Prabhupada explained it, that if someone takes a devotional service and chants any japa at all, or does any kind of thing, even touches the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, such a person will not see Yamaraj. That doesn't mean that they don't get some tough love from Krishna at some point along the line. They may, but they won't go through Yamaraj. That's the whole story in what canto is that where we have the Yamadutas visiting Yamaraj and complaining? It's sixth canto, right? So in sixth canto, Ajamil was very sinful, but he happened to chant the name of Krishna or Narayan at the time of death. And as a result of chanting the name Narayan, the Yamadutas came to get him. They knew this was their man, so they came with their ropes and their whips and all that kind of good stuff. And the Vishnu Dutas appeared and they blocked the Yamadutas from coming. And then the Yamadutas were angry. They thought, wait a minute, Yamaraj sent us. We came to get this sinful Ajamil, but these blue four-armed men were more powerful than we are, and they stopped us. So they went to Yamaraj and demanded an explanation. Yamaraj said, yes, that because Ajamil had chanted the holy name even once, he had destroyed more sins than it's even possible to commit in a lifetime. So he was not your man. And in the future, Yamaraj tells us, Yamadutas, if you see people who are engaged in devotional service wearing neck beads and they're chanting, do not even look at them, because they are dangerous for you. So in this way, those who are devotees of the Supreme Lord are not subject to the rules and regulations of Yamaraj, even if they are not very advanced in devotional service or they've fallen away or any of those kind of things.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask, how does exactly, by chanting the holy name, the karma is getting removed? Because I've heard from different devotees, they're telling me, for example, that
If you're not chanting
pure holy name, which is the topmost, you're chanting Namabas, or you're just being offensive, you won't actually remove your karma. You still have your karma. But at the other side, we know that devotee, by default, he doesn't have karma. So what does it actually mean? How do we understand this?
Well, from the way I understand it, there are 3 levels of chanting. There's Namaparad, Namabas, and Shuddhanam. This is described in the Harinam Chintamani. So Namaparad is chanting offensively. There are 10 offenses listed in the Padma Puran, and if you're chanting and committing those offenses, then the effect of the holy name is very muted, If you're chanting the holy name and you're aware of the offenses and you're trying to overcome them, then that's no longer Namaparad. That's what we call Namabas, or closeness to the proper chanting of the holy name. And in this way, the holy name is getting rid of all your karma. The holy name gets rid, it says in Harinam Chintamani, of the mist of anartha, which is Hridaya Dorbolyam, Asat Trishna, and something called aparad. So in the early stages, Asat Trishna and Hridaya Dorbolyam are destroyed. Hridaya Dorbolyam is weakness of heart. The attempt to try to do something but not being able to follow through on it, or being sidetracked. Whereas Asat Trishna is thirst for the material things of the material world. So by chanting, these are easily kind of removed in the short term if one is just sincere about trying to chant the holy name. However, aparad is not removed unless one makes a specific attempt to get rid of aparad. So aparad can seriously block the holy name's effect. It's mentioned that, like the sun is huge, the earth planet is tiny, so the sun is huge, and the clouds in the earth are not very big, but the cloud can stand between you and the sun. So the sun is there, but you're not able to take advantage of the sun because of this cloud of anartha. So if one is serious about chanting, in time it will remove everything. And generally speaking, if you are chanting without offense, you are destroying all your past karma. However, in the next 10 minutes, you can rack up some new karma. So that's what's not destroyed. Only when we reach the point of Shuddhanam are we at the stage where we're getting rid of all of our material desires, which are the linchpin of why we're here. Because of material desires, we have materialistic tendencies. Those materialistic tendencies lead to sin. That sin leads to karma. So if you stop material desire, then there's no materialistic tendency. Then there's no sin. Then there's no karma. But that's the point that you have to get to. And so in this way, the holy name is able to gradually, like the sun evaporating urine from a filthy place, the sun will eventually purify us completely, the sun of chanting the holy name of the Lord. So to the extent we can chant without offenses, to that extent, the chanting of the holy name will rapidly purify us, or if we chant with a lot of offenses, it will very, very slowly purify us. We may be getting rid of our past karma, but we're not getting rid of our material desires very quickly because we're committing offenses. So that's why it says if one chants the holy name with the 10 offenses, then even after millions of births, one will not get the love of Godhead, which is the ultimate goal of this process. Bahu Janma Kariyadi Shravana Kirtanam Tabutana Paya Krishna Padi Premadana. So if one is chanting with offenses, even after millions of lifetimes, one will not get the result, which is love of God. One will get at least release from karma, but the real benefit of the holy name is beyond that. So, did I answer your question?
Yes. So, like for example, when we say a devotee doesn't have karma, we actually mean a devotee who is at least, like you just said, chanting progressively.
Right.
This is the devotee which doesn't have karma.
Right.
Otherwise, other categories of devotees, they do have karma.
Well, here we get into a little bit of semantics, because sometimes we call what Krishna does to devotees Krishna karma. You know, like I've heard it referred to that way in ISKCON. It's not regular karma, it's Krishna karma. So regular karma, it's Yamaraj's deal. You know, Yamaraj, the 33 million demigods. There's a law book, the laws of Manu. There's all kinds of codes. When you break something, some infraction in the material world, you incur a particular kind of reaction. And Yamadutas are writing it down. So, you know, like Santa Claus, he knows whether you've been naughty or nice. And they write it all down. And then if you don't do something about it, you experience all that either at death or in your next lifetime. So karma stays with you. But because Krishna says that he carries what we lack and that we can forget about dharma, Krishna takes his own sense of how to purify us. And it's not the usual karmic chain anymore. So we could call it Krishna karma. And sometimes people just call it karma because it looks like karma, but it's not actually. It's Krishna's tough love that he sometimes gives to devotees. And it can be extreme, you know, in some cases. So it's not that Krishna just, if you're going to be a total nonsense as a devotee, it's not like Krishna will let you slide forever. Eventually, you'll see that Krishna's no fool. He knows what you're really up to. And, you know, he may give you some tough love. But it's described like karma is when a child steals something in the marketplace and the police come and arrest him, whatever the charge is or whatever the sentence is, he has to do that. But the child of a king or the child of some dignitary gets caught, the police don't do that. They turn him over to their father, and the father punishes him, but in a different way. One is impersonal and the other is personal. You know, the punishment is tailored to what will make us advance the quickest. In Krishna knows how it'll be. He knows we're somewhat sincere or he wouldn't be bothering with us, but he knows that we've got something that we're not ready to give up or whatever it is, so he's going to give us some issue for that. And through the suffering we get, then we understand our mistake and we move forward. Yes.
And we always hear about that Varnashram is not based on birth, it is based on quality and the work that one person performs. But then we can see clearly at the time of Mahabharata, or even earlier in Bhagavatam, we can see it's clearly based on birth actually.
That what?
That we can clearly see how Varnashram is based on birth. Like in this case, there was no king, and the king had to take birth in this line, you know, and not only in this line, but also from like, you know, person from the higher caste.
Right.
Like
right.
Vidura, I mean, he was more Brahminical by nature, but I'm sure there could have been other qualified kings, you know, to take the place, but it was not possible. So why is it like that? Because those persons, they must have understood that Varnashram is not based on birth, but still often it appears like it is based on birth. Even earlier when Karna came to fight with Arjuna, then also Karna was not allowed to fight because he was the son of the Sutta.
Right.
So generally it was accepted that Varnashram is by birth.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, that with Satya Yuga, in Satya Yuga, it's explained that there is no Varnashram Dharma in Satya Yuga, that basically there's one class, and that's kind of a Brahminical class. But already with Treta Yuga, we're starting to see the four Varnas employed. They start to filter out. And what are the four Varnas? They are, people of different character, and generally speaking, they're, people of a certain type will fall into a certain Varnic sort of category. Now, as we get closer to Kali Yuga, Shankara, or Varna Shankara, Shankara means mixed. So like a painter, you have maybe red, green, and blue. Those are the primary colors, And in the beginning, you've got three basic colors, and you're mixing red and green, and maybe red and blue. But as you get closer to Kali Yuga, things are being mixed even more and even more and even more and even more, till we get to the stage where in what did we say the other day? It's in the Skanda Purana. It says Kala Sudra Sambhava. In the age of Kali Yuga, more or less, we're all basically Shudras, with some proclivities, maybe a little bit of a Brahmana spot here and there, a little bit of a Kshatriya spot here and there, but we're basically Shudras, because we're like, the worst of the worst of the worst of the worst, and so everything's really mixed up at this point. At one time, it was not so mixed up, so at one point, it made sense to think of lineages and so on and so forth. And there was something to the line of kings, and there was something to people being born in this particular family. Those families were not just families by their birthright. They were families by birthright, plus they were following various samskaras to create a auspicious family that would carry and bring up a child in a way that would give that child a good chance to become a dutiful, knowledgeable, and powerful king, So that was the way it was. But all that's been lost now, because too much intermarrying, too much, everything, to the point where everything's everything at this point. And that's why Prabhupada made that statement, he pulled it out. There's another verse. We were talking with Arjuna Nanda the other day about this, because he asked that question about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that Prabhupada explains that in the age of Kali Yuga, not only we have this verse, Kalo Shudra Sambhava, but there's this other verse that says, I forget what the whole verse is, that by birth everyone is Shudra, by Dvija, by getting second birth, one becomes a Dvija. By learning the Vedas, one becomes a Vipra. But by learning how to serve the Supreme Lord in devotional service, one becomes actually a Vaishnava. So, there's this kind of idea that although we are the bottom of society, that by devotional service we are purified. So we are not trying to establish the Varnashram Dharma of 5 millennium ago, 50 centuries ago of Arjuna and Krishna. What we're trying to do is establish what we call Daivi Varnashram Dharma, which is Varnashram based on people who have taken purifying activity through devotional service. That's what we're trying to do. So at this point, people claiming I'm a Brahmana or I'm a Kshatriya because of my family makes no sense. 50 centuries ago, it did make sense to some extent, because back then the colors weren't quite so mixed up as they are now. You know, we had generally a kshatriya was actually a kshatriya, generally a brahmana was actually a brahmana. And so in that time it made more sense, and that's another reason why people who try to pretend that it's 50 centuries ago that we can apply all these categories by names and family reputations, that this is all, kind of stuff that doesn't really work, All right, so I've kept you 10 minutes beyond, and thank you very much for your kind attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.